Hi, and welcome to Apex Happy Hour. I am Leslie Connor, and Jason Sizemore and I are joined tonight by Grace Fong. She has a story in the special guest edited issue of Apex magazine called The Toll of the Snake. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, Grace.
Hi, it's awesome to be here.
um, I was thinking the other night about it's so interesting because, obviously Jason and I put together 6 issues of Apex magazine every single year. And we know what an Apex story is, right? It's kind of like a painter painting the same thing but differently every time. Like it's an Apex story. But it's really interesting to have a guest edited issue because it's like we're taking somebody else and being like, so you tell us what an Apex story is, and then hoping they give us back something that we're like, yes, that is it. And I have to say, I read your story and I was like, yes, this is an Apex story. Um, it's it's kind of dark and it's got some really cool, like, I want to talk to you about like some of the research that you would have to have done for this story because it takes place in like old Hollywood. um and it's just a very, very cool story. So can you tell us a little bit about like the process of writing it?
The process, well, I guess I was talking to my friends about comparing myths from different countries, which is where the inspiration came from, right? Because like snakes are pretty common motifs across multiple genres. And so like there's these with the Chinese legend of White Snake and the Greek myth of Medusa, they're both also snakes associated with feminine power. So I just kind of like was like, well, what kind of story would I want to tell with that? And I was like, oh, obviously a Hollywood story. I don't know how it was obvious, but like I just ended up there. Uh, and it's also because that's something a lot of my work deals with. I lived in Los Angeles for like 8 years, and I work in the entertainment industry and have literally since I graduated from university. And so I actually don't really know much else. So it just sneaks in, right? And yeah, so it involved watching a lot of movies, reading a lot of history online about specific actors and actresses, and just try to get a sense of what the world was like then, as well as how we see the world, how we now see the world back then. One of the things that I referenced a lot, like, or took a lot of inspiration from, was Ryan Murphy's Hollywood, which is basically this like, he totally reimagines Hollywood. He tells a story about wannabe actors and ingenues and stuff like that. And he's just kind of reimagining his own like idealized version of it.
I love the way that you used two myths and kind of brought them together. um and the white snake myth, the Chinese myth, was not one that I was very familiar with, and I'm vaguely familiar with Medusa just because I feel like it's so pervasive, but not really. Did you go back and like do a lot of research on those myths, or did you kind of just take what you already knew?
I mean, I largely relied on what I already knew as kind of like the jumping off point, but I was looking for more details of each one in order to insert it back, like make those callbacks in the story. So obviously for White Snake, I like looked up like what were the actual key parts. So when the story was told multiple times over and over, what was the thing that was going to be like that just kind of like held true for all of those versions. Like her meeting her lover on the bridge after she becomes human is a pretty common thread that goes through all of these versions. Same way how Medusa has to be viewed through a reflective surface so that Perseus remains safe when he's trying to kill her.
I wanted to commend you on creating a very uh, rich and uh, thoughtful protagonist. Uh, is she based on anyone in particular?
Yeah, so Meiko is based off of Anime Wong, who was one of the first Chinese American actresses. And she actually, for a time, like, because she participated in these movies that were all about Asia. And it was actually very common back then for them to hire a star of white descent and have them like dress up and play people from like different ethnicities. And this was actually, partially because of anti-miscegenation rules, where like you literally couldn't show people of different races and stuff kissing on screen. And at the time, Hollywood people were like, well, America's mostly white. They want to see white people, right? And so Anime Wong found that in Hollywood that she actually could not get a lot of the roles that she wanted, so she ended up moving to Europe. So even though she'd faced a lot of acclaim, she actually lost the role of being a lead to Louise Rayner.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was a part of the story that I thought was like super well done. And there was this part where I was angry for Mako. Like I'm like, that's her spot. Like so yeah, I really enjoyed that part. Because it made me feel something so much that I knew that the character was feeling. Um, I'm sorry, my dog is being incredibly annoying today.
You can't just like mention a dog and not show it.
He's like
You
chasing
see on
his
the floor.
tail like right beside me, and I'm like, that is so distracting.
But it's so cute. Yeah, the
He's
thing
like,
is,
it's walk time.
I feel like a lot of people who don't work in like Hollywood or entertainment or these arts where it's all about image crafting, like advertising, probably the same way, right? Or even like reality TV, is a lot of the decisions are based off of finances and what they think that people want to buy. And so even like to this day, like you get cases like Scarlett Johansson is cast as Makoto from Ghost in the Shell, because even though like if you ask a lot of people from like who were in Japan versus people in Asian Americans, people in Japan are like, that's cool. She's like a huge movie star. Like she's also Black Widow, so it makes sense to put action star into action star role. And so these are kind of like the way there's a lot of that thought process that still goes on in a lot of casting, um, because they're just trying to like a lot of the motivation is not necessarily like blatant racism, as in like we're never going to cast Chinese people because they're or Japanese people as Makoto because white people are better, but simply because there is a lot of like tacit financial motivation where they're trying to stay risk averse and follow a lot of like justifications, or not a lot of patterns that were set beforehand.
Right. Well, I think that might hold true in a lot of industries where you're looking for somebody to buy a product, right? Whereas in the on like publishing side, when we're looking to start a new anthology or something, we want to solicit authors who have a bigger name, right? More so that we're kind of like pooling in their audience. Hopefully, I mean, I wish it wasn't that way, but you do have to sell a product at the end of the day. We need it to be not all white.
Yeah, that goes with how you got to change the system from the inside.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and raise the voices of Anglo, non-Caucasian creators. And so that way people will be demanding, that we have more diverse folks at the top of these anthologies and what have you.
Yeah, it's definitely a business of like it's like measured steps, right? And so for a lot of publishers, which are a lot more agile, especially small presses, places like Apex, y'all have like the ability to take more risks. At Hollywood, we're talking about like multi-million dollar, like in 2010, the average animated film cost somewhere between 90 and $100 million to produce.
Wow.
So well, Bridesmaids cost 30 million. So the gap can be pretty wide, but it really depends. Like a fantasy film or anything with large amount of effects is going to be on the higher end. So everything generally lands somewhere in between there. And so because you don't want to lose money completely, then you want to hedge your you want to um like make sure you do have a lot of that star power. But it's what is always of concern to me is when things get so stratified and people are relying solely on tentpoles, like so those big Marvel level like $80 million films, they lose a lot of their flexibility and they lose a lot of their ability to take risk and do those smaller films like Bridesmaids or like even like movies like The Hangover and stuff. So you lose kind of like you're putting all they put a lot of their eggs in one basket nowadays because of the way the funding works.
Which is sad because then we kind of lose out on really amazing and really interesting stories. Like those quirky films that when you're watching it, you're like, there's no way that this would have been done, large scale, but it's so amazing. And I feel the same. It's the same with publishing. It's like sometimes you read these books or stories by people that you're like, this is so amazing. Um, Come here if you're gonna be such a brat.
What's his name?
His name is Oz.
Hi, Oz.
He is just. We didn't get a walk today because I was trying to finish stuff for work, and I'm paying for it now. Hi, you've completely distracted what we were talking about. He does not care.
He's like, Mama's giving me attention. I don't care.
Yeah, he's
He's
just
the star of
like
the show.
he's like I'm done. You need to be done online. But I have read books, in pitches of books and portions of books where I've looked to an author and I'm like, this book is too big, or it should be too big for a small press like Apex. Like we're at a limited reach. And I always feel bad saying that to an author because you kind of can see it on their face, that like heartbroken moment of like, I'm giving them a soft no, but I'm meaning it in the best possible way. Like I want them to reach a wider audience than I know that we may be able to do as a small press. And I'm just like, just give it a little bit more time. Let somebody find this because it's magic, you know? But then sometimes those magic books don't find their audience at all because, you've got small presses who are going, no, you need somebody bigger, and big presses aren't willing to put the money behind an unknown.
Yeah, there's been so much economic, I guess, dropout of mid-list that it's like it's pretty concerning to me. And I feel like the way that, or at least the way that I would try to fix it, and how I always try to like do things is always to try and make connections, right? Like helping match people up with the right opportunities. Like having worked in entertainment for so long, it very much is that kind of like it's not what you know, it's who you know kind of business. Because I'm not I'm definitely not like a fluffy, like cozy kind of writer, right? But like I've got friends who fucking love it. And I know people who are like, I want that stuff. I want to make that short story collection. Legends and Lattes just came out. And
which is a wonderful book.
Yeah. And so like you just kind of I guess like my advice or my hope is that we start moving away from considering things only based off of finances and more based off of like mutual support. Because I feel like the whole point of capitalist economic theory was actually to get goods to people who actually wanted them and not just have them float around, right? And so like supply and demand would fluctuate. But I feel like because everything has kind of been reduced to money rather than through service, or whether the good is elastic or inelastic or whatnot, that it's actually like helping people with, then it's all just about number go up rather than like, oh, if we have a surplus of bottled water here, why don't we send it to that place, like Flint, Michigan, or anywhere that actually needs it? Like, I feel like late stage capitalism actually like pretty divorced from the original supply demand economic theory, if you ask me.
Yeah, I would agree.
Oh my gosh,
Just
that's one of my uh like up on a pedestal moment things that I like to hound go on about. Anyway, sorry, Leslie. This is about writing, not economic theory.
It's all the same to me, man.
Hey,
well,
yeah.
okay, well that
Loopy
kind of
steak
was what
brain.
I was gonna ask you is that like beyond, your setting stories that take place within Hollywood and within that sort of circle, how does your day job inspire outside of like that's my setting, like the knowledge and stuff in the background of all of that?
My day job is to be a narrative designer, right? So basically, I am working on storytelling in video games and in card games. And so, what this career has given me an advantage in is the ability to separate story from prose. So, I'm very much a beat oriented, theme oriented, character oriented kind of writer. So, it's like character bios, stuff like that. Like, I have to be able to tell a story with just the dialogue or even just images of the world. Like if you have to write a comic book that has no dialogue in it, that's one of the potential challenges that you have as a game designer. So, like Magic the Gathering, very much so. You just have one picture to tell a story. And so basically, what I spend a lot of time trying to divorce um, image or not divorce image to like divorce the story from the sentence, if that means anything, and
Okay.
convey it. Like if you showed somebody a photo, would they still understand what's going on? Would they still get the same emotional beats? If they're going through a game level, are they still going to get those same emotional beats? Are they experiencing things linearly or non-linearly?
See, I just want to listen to you talk about all this and how you put things together all day. Like, I'm like, I have no questions. Just keep telling me.
I guess
You're
like
like, I don't have anything.
I have like maybe a little bit more. So basically, I think it also comes down to a lot of psychology.
Okay.
Um, like, and I'm not actually a psychology kind of person. I took consumer psych when I was in college, but that's about it. I don't have like no formal psych degree or anything. I've been to therapy. Does that count? But like, basically, it's about understanding. I take a pretty logical approach to understanding empathy, if that makes any sense. Like through a lot of the sensory experiences that we have and our experiences with other people, what kind of emotions does this elicit within us? So it's like if somebody charges at you, then you're going to experience like flight or fight or any of those types of things. And it's about crafting an experience, whether it's using sentences or art or gameplay to activate those like really basic psychology things and have your brain essentially replay a feeling in a fictional world. So if I want to terrorize somebody, then I'm going to be like, all right, we're going to put 40 monsters here at the start and we're going to hide them all in the dark so that as soon as you go 3 steps, you're going to be in the middle of this. This is going to trigger every single like I don't know if it's a hypothalamus. Again, I said I'm not a psych person, but like it's going to trigger that crocodile brain and you're going to feel fear, even though your conscious self knows that I'm playing a video game. I am not dying.
I love it. So, okay, how, like, if you're writing all day and crafting stories all day for your day job, um, how does that impact, like, what does your writing time look like? Do you have like a routine, or is it just like some days you come home and you're
Yeah,
like, I need to tell more?
how
Or
are
are
you
you like,
not creatively drained at the end of the day?
right, exactly. Like,
I feel like everybody asks me this, and the answer is I am. Like I'm like, oh, I wish I could say like I'm some Superman or like there's some magic pill that I take. I no.
Well,
Like I mean, I guess I try to take good care of my body. I exercise a lot and like, do my calorie counting and make sure that all that stuff, try to get a good night's sleep. Because I figured out I can perform a lot better if I have a good night's sleep.
That's amazing when you figure that out, isn't it?
uh, but other than that, it's just kind of, I'm actually a pretty go with the flow kind of person. I pivot around whatever shows up in my inbox. And then like I'll I guess like I try to plan my time out like a month or two at a time. Okay. So it's like whatever project catches my eye first that is most on fire, like either the kind of on fire as in like I'm most passionate about it or has to be done because the deadline's coming up. Those are both two types of fire. And then I negotiate chores with my partner. He's super helpful and like definitely plays into my ability to get things done, and just kind of negotiate like social events as well and the classes I'm taking, and just by like trying to plan out like the next month or so to like buy the time that way.
I love how that's you slid in the classes I'm taking, like a whole nother level of stress. Jason and I are just like, all right, you know what? You now edit Apex because you obviously have all the energy.
It's only one class at a time. It's Clarion West.
Oh, only Clarion West.
I mean, it's not like the 6-week program. Remember, I do have a day job. What day job lets you go for like 6 weeks at a time? That ain't happening.
It's just amazing that you slid that in. You're like, the class work. I'm like, oh my gosh. We didn't even take that into account.
I mean, I don't really consider it like classwork if it results in like a story that I can publish, right? 2 birds with 1 stone. Yeah. I try to take a lot of projects that have like 2 uses, like like if I'm doing a client piece, sometimes I'll negotiate with them to say like, hey, would you let me use this new technique that I want to try out? Or I'll do like some small samples and ask them if it's okay. Or like if I'm writing something, I'll do art along with it so that I can kind of like just like more than 2 birds with the same stone.
Yeah, it's all about managing your time and multitasking properly, right?
I am a super multitasker. Like I've actually got Discord open another window just in case somebody messaged me about going to IKEA tonight.
Love that you have your priorities. You're like, I am out in an hour because I have to play Pokemon and then I'm going to IKEA. I love it. No, I actually love that.
I could see Grace and Leslie becoming best of friends.
I'd be like, I want to go play Pokemon.
The Pokemon is part of the exercise routine.
Yes. I will say yes, definitely. I have the dog and I take much longer walks because I'm like, I need to go this much farther.
I'm like 25 kilometers a week. If I don't hit that, I am ashamed of myself.
Yep. I feel that.
I need those incubators.
Jason's like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about at this point.
Going outside, what's that?
We just like lost him.
I am super lucky that I live in a super walkable city with a lot of public transit. It takes we have to decide one place a week to go to at least take the car out so it doesn't die.
I live in a small town, so I don't have.
Oh man.
You have
a dog though.
I do have a dog, and he does make sure that I get out. Unfortunately, we drive to the park because he's a little dog, and the big dogs in our neighborhood think he's a chew toy. So I don't like to walk in here. No. So we go to the park, where hopefully people have their dogs on leashes. Okay, so trying to veer back on track. Do you have time to read? That's my question. Because I was going to ask, what are you reading? What do you like to read? And then I was like, well, wait.
So 3 birds with 1 stone, right? I am an avid consumer of audiobooks. I actually got into reading via audiobooks because I was living in Los Angeles, and driving in that city is a goddamn nightmare. There's no, I've experienced very few things that are worse on the road. Um, and so like I had like, a commute that was like 25 minutes each way. And my friend was like, hey, did you know Los Angeles Public Library allows you to use the Libby app to borrow audiobooks? And the LAPL has an amazing, amazing selection. And so we started reading YA books together. We'd actually use the same like library card to make sure that we were always like on the same uh on the same book, because we both worked in this hellscape known as Woodland Hills, which is nothing but desert and malls. And so we would get Chipotle on Friday and talk about the books that we were reading. Um, so I always find that's another, I guess, part of, when people are thinking about how stories are consumed, I always think about like it may not necessarily be them looking at prose on a page. So for me, whenever I write a story, such as Toll of the Snake, I was thinking, how does this story sound if somebody read it out loud? Like I wanted them to still be able to experience it without like looking as to where the words are. In contrast to say somebody who does like acrostic poetry, or those poetry types so they teach you where the actual position of the word on the page matters.
Yeah. It's funny, before you jumped on to the Zoom, I was chatting about how, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks as well. Normally when I'm going to pick my daughter up from school or when I'm doing chores around the house and stuff. And I listen to a lot of nonfiction, typically true crime. And so like as I'm like pulling in front of the school and waving to the principal, I'm like, can he hear what I'm listening to?
I think it's more embarrassing to listen. So I do listen to horror and I do listen to romance sometimes, and I do listen to nonfiction. And based off of who's getting in my car, I think overall romance has been the one that gets the most side eye.
I try not to, because I just play it out loud. So my poor family like walks into the kitchen and it's like, right now I'm listening to a biography about Ed Gein. He's a serial killer. And so like my family's like, why is our murder? What? And I'm just like, sorry. So I try not to listen to romance because I could just see my children coming through like right at the wrong time. And I'm like frantically looking for the pause
Or
button.
even worse, your husband, and then he's like raising his eyebrows, bouncing them up and down. Oh yeah.
Usually I find like for audiobooks in particular, is it creative nonfiction works really well. And a lot of YA books I think hit really well on audio, because I feel like the more direct sentence structure tends to be easier to consume with audio, when especially when you're trying to drive and not hit anything.
Yeah.
You just like anything that's like, like sentence structure, like subject, verb, direct, object, it lets you process the information and visualize it without having to like hold too much of the sentence in your head at the same time. So for longer books, or books like with like more focus on prose or more poetic type things, I kind of stick to those on paper.
Yeah, I find nonfiction for me is the easiest for an audiobook because it is that very direct sentences and stuff. So I listen to a lot of random biographies other than
Yeah.
true crime.
Yeah, I really liked Amber Lowe, but it was difficult to listen to Amber Lowe, and it was easy to read Amber Lowe because of the that really poetic sentence structure.
Do you
Yeah.
read did you read your Apex magazine story aloud to yourself?
Very quietly, so nobody could tell I was doing it.
Really?
I don't like I or when my partner's not home and it's just me and the cat because she doesn't understand English. I get a little embarrassed when I
Yeah.
read myself out loud.
I have to read everything I write out loud, even the editorials I write for the magazine. I'm like, I have to read it out loud or I will leave a word out.
Huh.
So, I'm not sure if anybody is monitoring the chat, if there are
There's a chat.
questions. Well, on YouTube there would be, but I can't see it. So if you have any questions, I'm sorry. I
Uh-oh.
apologize.
Where is our tech support?
Okay, we got a
Okay.
nothing in chat. All right, just making sure our invisible tech person will feed those to us if they come in. So if you have a question for Grace that we have not covered and that you would like us to cover, please put it in the chat so that we can cover it before the end of the hour. Your story comes out next week, I believe, online, right? The 18th.
Told the Snake came out already.
Yeah, it's already on the website.
Oh, is it? Cool. See, I was gonna do that whole thing where I was afraid that we were gonna ruin something that people didn't have the opportunity to read yet, and I was like, how like into this can we get? The scene between Meiko and Patricia with, I still don't want to ruin it.
I personally consider nothing in the first act of a story as like a huge spoiler, because that's what you would put on the on like that like enticement kind of blurb on the back anyway.
It's just hard with short stories because you're like, it all feels like a spoiler, like if I say anything. But that relationship between like Minerva and Meiko and Patricia is sort of an interesting one, because it's like you have a woman who is definitely in power above Patricia and Meiko, who is almost like, it's like she's pushing each of their buttons to try and twist the scenario. Was that an interesting kind of relationship to kind of explore with these three women?
Yeah, that was actually like one of the main, that was actually part of the core of writing and choosing the story. Originally, Patricia was actually added to the story later.
Okay.
In like a second draft, when I realized, well, 1.5 draft, because I was like, this isn't working. Oh, this is why. And basically, Patricia's there to provide a foil to Meiko's experience. But you see, like they're both being controlled by Minerva, right? In part because Minerva is the stand-in for the goddess Athena, who like basically orchestrated the entire Medusa, entire myth of Medusa, from Medusa herself to Perseus. And like it's essentially the conflict of the story, if you ask me, is the conflict between the desires of all three women. And so, because like what Minerva wants, which is a very successful Hollywood picture that will let her advance, versus Meiko also wanting a Hollywood picture, but she's the star of it, versus Patricia getting a Hollywood picture where she can like regain her glory days. You essentially like have three people fighting over the same like single role in a film, even if they're not going to be on it.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I liked I'm still like trying to like talk around things. I liked how it was kind of unveiled that the sort of impressions that Meiko and Patricia have about each other, how they're both wrong, you know? Like I was like, oh wait a second. Like it's the same, because I really feel like Minerva is really the villain. Even though like she would never see herself as the villain. Like in her mind, she's doing what she needs to do to better her career. Whether in playing these two actresses off of each other is what is going to get her what she desires. But it was that moment of like, she has a system. Like, she knows what she's doing the entire time. And I found that super fascinating, and I found that really like kind of deeper for a character like that is not the main protagonist than you can usually get in a short story, because you only have so many words in a short story. But just through very quick little things, you reveal so much about her character and her intentions. And I thought that was really, really well done.
Thank you. I feel like for Minerva specifically, because she's never a close POV character for the reader, I was doing a lot of it through dialogue and the way that she does dialogue. And one of my favorite types of villains is the benevolent villain, like, or sorry to bring up Harry Potter because J.K. Rowling's a trash fire, but even as a kid, I knew that Professor Umbridge, the character, was like so sweet and blah blah blah. She's just doing this for your own good. Was the one actually that I hated most,
right?
Because of that hypocrisy and like, at least Voldemort is like, I am evil and I'm owning it, right? There's something really admirational there about it, but when it's like kind of snuck around and manipulative, there's something like super sinister about that. And so Minerva is representative of that behavior, which is actually very common in Hollywood, where because you're working with so many people, a lot of times you acquire etiquette behaviors specific to like, they're like, you can't really say something like terrible about somebody else because you never know what will come bite you in the ass. And like, there are a lot of great people, but there's a lot of people who like, they believe that this is the way to climb the ladder, and she comes out of that. So she's more of a she is more of an embodiment of like a social or structural way of thinking than she is herself like a very, very specific character.
Yeah. I just thought when it kind of became very evident that this isn't her first rodeo. Like, she knows immediately what she's doing and how she's going to pull strings. And I was just like, Minerva. Like,
So I was wondering, so on top of the incisive takedown of like the cutthroat culture that pervades Hollywood, was there an intentional tie-in with the Medusa myth and the concept of beauty and becoming ugly and seeing, your career go down the drain just because of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, since I started with Medusa as like the core Greek myth, that's why White Snake is the fictional aspect of the film, but the real, as in like the one part that you're following, is heavily inspired by Medusa, and White Snake is just the layer on top of like, that's the fictional story that they're trying to tell within the fictional story that I'm trying to tell. Because if you look at the original myth, like Medusa, or one of the threads I found while researching the myth was that Medusa was turned into the monster because of how she defied Athena, essentially. And that was kind of like the crux of like how I knew that how Mako as a protagonist was going to transform. Except in more modern times, rather than being some ugly freak, there's a lot of conversation as to like, when you give a woman monstrous powers, like it is potential that like a modern interpretation of Medusa is actually stronger than her pre-monster self. And so I wanted to do a modern adaptation in that sense.
yeah, it's good. It was good. It was really, that's my review. That's my review. It was good. You should read it, everyone, because it was good.
There's many layers.
It's only Tuesday, and that's like tapped out already this week. So do you have like any other things like in the works? Like I love that you look a month ahead to plan your writing time and everything. So it's like, what is that writing time kind of like? What are some things that you're working
Yeah,
towards
what
right
would be working on 8 years from now?
now?
I'm like, my only goal 8 years from now is to still be alive.
That's a good one. That's a good
Starting
starting
I
point.
going
hear
slow,
ya.
guys.
Oh yeah.
uh, so, I mean, I am treating myself a little bit, having sold the story. I'm working on just like a personal piece of artwork. And also I am working on, well, the story for the class that I'm taking. So there's a deadline there, and I have to get at least like X thousand words per time class meets.
hmm
Um, and then I'm working on another story that's set in like this I made a comic about it. They're like called Not Witches, right? And they're just people in a New England inspired seaside town who have the ability to essentially control the weather by making nets and knots and stuff like that. And the knots are, in this iteration, a harsh metaphor for their relationship literally untying.
That sounds amazing.
I don't think I've ever heard of Not Witches before.
I don't know. I just thought like, you know, I don't know. I used to take Chinese knots as a kid.
Yeah,
Like there's a lot of like little dangly knot decorations and stuff. And so that and like sailors knots have different meanings, different uses.
this is
And
true. Yeah.
so I thought that would be a cool way to cast spells. That's literally the
So,
doesn't go
like,
deeper than that.
can like fisherman knots count? Like,
Yeah.
can you can make spells with those?
Yep.
Cool. Back in the day, I used to know all kinds of different fisherman knots. But so, do you find that uh, the gaming industry is less or more cutthroat than what you see in Hollywood?
I luckily have never worked in live action, which I hear is the most cutthroat. But I've always, because I came from the technical side, my experiences in animation and gaming actually been really nice. My teams are great, and like generally we still hang out even after the job is over. There's the industry is very much made of people who are, you know, uh, bonded together by pressure, right? You know how
hmm
it's like when you have two pieces of metal and you smack them together, the harder they are, the more they become one.
Yeah.
Because basically, you and your friends, you're all under the same deadline, right? And for projects like animation and games, there's less a very obvious like front person. Luckily, I'm not an actor who has to compete for roles. Everything I do is behind the scenes. And so you have a lot more, there's a lot more focus on teamwork and organization and structure and like having people's backs that is actually not super it's obviously not super evident if you're just watching the Oscars or the Emmys where they talk about like you're like, I don't know who that VFX person is, but I know Michelle Yeoh when she's up there because the people who are watching the movies don't like you see the actor, you don't see every single person that's part of that several hundred credits. And I'm part of one of those back end folks.
So, where does the publishing industry fit in? Is it worse, better, same?
I'd say it's a little worse because video game and animation have pretty strong like animation probably the strongest like because they have unions. So when you get dropped by a studio, you have at least 6 months of like uh, unemployment and healthcare to keep you buoyed as you look for your next job. Video games is not as good as that because they don't have a union, but there are a large number of studios compared to publishing houses. So, and also because it's significantly digital, there's a lot of remote work. So you don't necessarily have to like pick yourself up and move to a new city where you know no one just because you need a job. Whereas like publishing tends not, oh yeah, and video games, very often, if you are working in a company, you have full-time benefits like healthcare and retirement packages and stuff like that. Whereas publishing or in any industry that's heavily reliant on pure freelancers, there it becomes more cutthroat because every individual is um, very much like focused on trying to get enough resources to get by. So there are a lot, I know significantly fewer full-time authors than I know full-time game developers because of all of those really important safety nets and systems that the industry puts into place. It's not something that gets talked about very frequently, I feel, because everybody's focused on the creative work. But a lot of these backbones are what's necessary for good books, for good movies to come out.
I think
I
you are in a super unique position to kind of have a a front seat view in so many different creative industries. Like it's really interesting to be like, so how's everything like? It's very interesting because you're in such a I wonder how many other people are in the same sort of position where they have that firsthand experience because it's fascinating.
Nyla Magruder.
Okay.
She's a good friend of mine, and she very much worked in animation, is part of the guild, worked on Tangled. She also works in publishing. She makes graphic novels, MFK, and is working on one called Real Love. She does a lot of YA and children's work. And I actually like have noticed, and my other friend Akem is also cross industry. And I think it actually might be a cultural thing
Okay.
because the people I'm naming, we're all actually people of color. And like, if you're growing up in a situation where your family is very aware that you may grow up disadvantaged, then they tend to push you towards multiple potential avenues. And so you end up trying out many things. So that's why I was like doing art and doing game design and doing writing, like versus that very like, the very American cultural, like going up to a 4-year-old and asking them what they want to be when they grow up. And that's why I'm like, 8 years from now, alive is good. Because I'm not thinking about career as can I like the job label that I put in on my Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm thinking about as like the culmination of everything.
That's interesting that you said that because I'm a Girl Scout leader and have been for many, many years. And that's a conversation that came up in the process of a badge very recently. And one of the little, I mean, she's like 7. She's like, I don't know. And I said, well, that's fine. I said, I'm in my 40s and I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. And she looks at me and she goes, you are grown up? I was like, man, savage. Like, don't tell me that. But yeah, I think it's kind of strange to ask. I think it's strange to ask high school seniors, okay,
Yeah.
you're going to college, pick what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Like, how do they know?
I feel like, what is it? I read somewhere like the average American switches careers like 3 to 4 times over the course of their life. And as things get more distributed and the economy gets less stable, I would assume that like the ability to pivot gets more and more prescient.
Right.
I'm very millennial.
In a good way, right?
In a constantly terrified of the economy way.
Oh yeah.
Well, yes. We all work in publishing.
Yeah, we live in a state of fear.
Yeah.
It's Wild West out there.
It really, yes. That's a much deeper conversation.
Yeah, I did the career pivot thing. I used to be a software developer and pivoted to becoming a publisher. Was that a wise choice? Well, you could debate no. But uh, I figured, I had done enough, saved back enough money to do a little something for me, to do the career that I wanted to do. Fortunately, it's worked out so far. So,
Woohoo!
yeah, the whole pivot thing and being flexible, I think you're spot on. We definitely need to make sure that young people aren't so dead set on one pathway when they go into college nowadays. That's just setting them up for heartbreaking failure, in my opinion.
Well, that and that there's no right way to do it. Like, so college
As
is
long
hard to,
as, yeah,
you know?
as long as you're happy and fed and warm and safe,
Mhm.
that should be considered success. But unfortunately, in late stage capitalism, it's that's not deemed as enough anymore. So now
So
I sound like a Gen X old man, so it's okay.
So we do have a question from the chat. It says, jumping off of Leslie's point of overlapping creative areas, what creative discipline has been the scariest or least scary for you to put yourself out there and apply in?
Least scary is probably computer science because the bar is it's a much more binary skill check. It's like, did you pass your constitution check? Yes, you're okay. Because it's very much like you can tell if the program works or not. And it matters less, like you don't have to emotionally connect with your software user so much. It's more like, did the program crash? Okay, that's not good. Did it work? Cool. um, so because that's a very skill-based check, it's not super terrifying. And being a programmer for long enough, I kind of am like, yeah, that's out of my skill set. And then I just step back. Um, I'm very comfortable with just not being the best at a lot of things.
I think that's an important skill set right there.
Yeah, it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll help you find somebody who actually can do it. Like, I am not a back end person. God, I have never taken operating systems in my life. But most scary is actually product publishing. Because where everything else, like, with video games and with animation and all those, there's a lot of established safety nets and a lot of, um, you know, with you're very often also selling some level of skill bar. Like, if you know how to use Unity or Unreal or something, that's a skill advantage, even if you are applying to video games for a writing position. There's like very clear, like, check this box. But with publishing, it's a lot more vibes oriented, like, and it's a lot more personal. So it's like you're sending something in and you're like, is the thing that I think that I like, are they going to like it? So because there's a lot more wiggle room, I feel it's more um, scary in the sense like there's a significantly larger portion of risk. And because the only thing that I'm like selling is not like skills based, I can't be like, hey, I can paint a face for you. This is very much a checkbox that I can hit. It's like I am painting a story about like a very specific period in time, which you may know nothing about or don't care about a very specific character, using a lot of my personal experiences that you may or may not have, and therefore you may either not connect with them or even worse, be like, this is a complete and utter bullshit lie. Nobody has experiences like this. And so that becomes super like kind of anxiety inducing for me. I wouldn't necessarily call it like fear or anything, but it is anxiety.
Then to not to add another level of anxiety on top of that, but on our back end, there's so many more decisions that go into it other than do we love this story or not? Like, do we love this story? And does it fit like this specific word count slot that I have open in this issue? Do we love this story? And we don't have another story like it already accepted that we're waiting to publish. Like, do I love this story? Did we just publish something like it 2 issues ago and it's too soon to accept another story? You know, there's like so many other facets that goes into that. Yes, we want this story, rather than just like, do I love this story or not? Sorry.
No,
Well,
it makes perfect sense.
as a creator, you're also, when you're having your work put out to the public, you're joining the cultural discourse in a way. And uh, I know, especially for disadvantaged people and uh, PLCs, that can be a frightening thing. And this is one of the reasons that we do these guest edited issues to help raise the voice and just, make it more common for people to experience like Grace's perspective on that very specific niche of Hollywood in the time frame. So
yeah, because there's nothing worse as an editor and publisher than loving a story and to have it fall flat. Like to put it out there and you're expecting the reaction, like people to be like, I love it, I love it, I love it. And we can be like, we know Grace is amazing. You know, that's what we want. That's what we feed off of. And that's, I don't want to say what we expect, but you do sometimes you read a story and you're like, this story is magic. It's pure, it's wonderful. And I want everyone else to get to experience that wonder. And if everyone else doesn't experience that wonder, you're like, oh.
You're like, shit, was I wrong?
Right. Like, is it me?
Yeah.
But and it happens. I will forever stand by those stories and be like, no, I was not wrong because that story is amazing. You guys just don't see it.
I have a lot of ways to assuage and ignore the fear of submission and stuff like that. One is very much often asking myself, what's the worst that could happen? And it's like, you just don't get an answer and the story stays yours and you could just keep trying on submitting and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, that's why I work elsewhere. So that way, like, I don't ever find myself in a position where I'm like, oh my God, if this story doesn't sell, I'm going to have to sell my car and then I'm going to have to starve. So by managing a lot of those, societal basic needs and stuff like that, I feel we'd have a lot more, I guess, risks in art, a lot more room for art, a lot less anxious creatives. Mm-hmm. And like, yeah, just managing that whole what's the worst that could happen expectation.
Yeah. And I mean, at least when you have a story, like you said, you have it. And if you get a no one place, you can take it someplace else. It's not like, that story, you're like, it's only an Apex story. And if Apex says no, then I'm burning it. Like, no, send it someplace else.
It's also like, love your process, love yourself. Cause like, that's the thing. Like, I don't draw to be like, this is why I don't understand like people who are like, the AI prompt is going to be like AI prompt is going to get rid of all artists. And it's like, that's not why artists do art, right? It's because the process of the creation is where you experience the satisfaction of having something that you've made with your own hands and that level of pride. And yeah, it kind of may feel sucky if like nobody else connects with it, but you have that whole time and experience of having put in the work and having made something fun for yourself. And for me, that's a form of self-care that frequently gets ignored. Like self-care for me is not buying bath bombs.
Yeah, me either.
It's just like, I'll buy a bath bomb and I'm like, this is nice for like 15 minutes. And I'm like, well, I'm bored now.
Well, it has been, we are at 9 o'clock, unless there are any like last second, oh my gosh, you need to know this question from Grace right now questions. It is time for us to be signing off. I know Grace has other plans this evening.
She's got to catch them all.
I got shelters to catch.
Hey, I respect that completely. So, but thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us. Your story is wonderful. If you have not read The Toll of the Snake yet, it is available on the Apex website. Go ahead and go and read it. It is a delight. But thank you so much. It has been super fascinating talking to you and getting to hear about your many experiences.
I'm sorry I meander a lot.
No, you are wonderful. And as someone who lives in a small town and does not have those many, like, I can tell you about Girl Scouts, but that's about as much as my, it's not.
Girl Scouts is so cool. I never got to do Girl Scouts. My parents weren't friends with anybody, so they couldn't be like, yeah, go Girl Scout with that person. My parents have no friends.
But it has been wonderful to chat with you, and I'm sure we are going to see many more stories from you out there in all the places.
Thank you. It'll be slow, but
well, you can't just like whip them out there. It's not like you have other things to do. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Grace.
Bye, everyone.